The story begins in a forest with a team of hunters who had killed many animals. These hunters used to skin the animals and sell their hides in the city. They had just packed up the hides and were preparing to leave when suddenly, the tribal people of the forest attacked them and surrounded them from all sides. The forest tribes were furious and began shooting arrows at the hunters. Many members of the hunting team were killed. The tribe attacked because their chief's daughter had been kidnapped, and they believed these hunters were responsible for it. The hunters tried to fight back, but the tribesmen were greater in number. The hunters couldn't hold their ground, and many of them were killed. Now, the captain of the hunting team realized that if they kept fighting, everyone would die. He told his men to grab as many hides as possible and run toward the boat. Here, the movie's main character Glass comes to his son and tells him to hurry to the boat. Just then, they see another large group of tribal warriors approaching. The hunters stop fighting and start running toward the boat to save their lives. Meanwhile, several more hunters are killed. Only a few manage to reach the boat and escape down the river. After the hunters leave, the tribal warriors seize all the remaining hides. But their chief cannot find his daughter among them. The chief orders his people to collect whatever hides are left from the American hunters. He says they will trade these hides with French hunters in exchange for horses and guns, and will keep searching for his daughter until they find her. On the other hand, the American hunters, Glass and his group, are still terrified even after traveling far. They keep their guns ready because they know the tribesmen won't give up the chase so easily and could attack at any moment. They can't decide which direction to take. The captain asks Glass, "What should we do?" Glass replies that they should leave the boat and travel by land, because the tribesmen will follow the river and catch up with them quickly. Traveling by land, he says, is the safest route. However, one man from the group, named Gerald, doesn't agree. He says, if we go by land, they'll kill us faster. The land route is long. It'll take weeks to get home. But the captain says, Glass knows this region better than any of us. We should follow his lead. The group agrees to go by land. Gerald reluctantly accepts the decision, though some of the others still disagree. Those who oppose Glass's plan decide to continue by boat through the river. The two groups part ways, one by land, one by river. Before leaving, the captain tells everyone, we should leave the hides here so we can travel faster and avoid trouble. Everyone agrees. They hide the hides under rocks, hoping that if they ever return, they'll find them again. Then, they begin their journey through the forest. But their troubles are only starting because the cold winter season is approaching, and they must walk for weeks to reach home. They have no other choice, so they prepare to endure the freezing weather as they travel through the forest on foot. Evening falls. They decide to camp for the night. After a while, night deepens, and they all fall asleep in the wilderness. The next morning, the men who had doubted Glass's decision to travel by land begin to regret it. The tribesmen find the hunters who had stayed on the boat route and kill them. Then, realizing that some of the Americans escaped through the forest, the tribe spread out to search every corner of the jungle. One tribesman finds footprints belonging to the American hunters and reports it to his chief. The tribal chief is convinced that his kidnapped daughter is with those very men. The tribesmen then begin following the footprints to track them down. Meanwhile, Glass and his group have been walking for hours through the dense forest. Exhausted, they stop to rest and set up camp for a while. Everyone is starving, but they have nothing to eat. So, Glass decides to go hunting alone to find food. As he moves deeper into the forest, he begins to sense that someone or something is nearby. He raises his gun cautiously and prepares himself. Suddenly, he spots two small bear cubs in front of him. Before he can retreat, a massive grizzly bear charges at him from behind. The bear knocks the gun out of Glass's hands and attacks him viciously. The enormous creature claws and slams him to the ground, tearing deep wounds into his body. Helpless and bleeding, Glass lies still on the ground. The bear, thinking he's dead, begins to move away. Summoning every ounce of strength, Glass drags himself toward his fallen gun. But just as he reaches it, the bear charges again. Glass quickly fires. The shot hits the bear's neck instead of its head. The bear roars in rage and slashes at Glass's throat, ripping it open. It continues mauling him brutally, shredding his body with its claws. However, the bear, too, is weakening from the gunshot wound. In a desperate act, Glass pulls out his knife and stabs the bear repeatedly. Both tumble down a slope, crashing violently into the ground below. The huge bear collapses on top of Glass, dead, but Glass is barely alive. His throat is torn open, his body covered in deep gashes and blood pouring from everywhere. He lies there in unbearable pain, unable to move. The sound of his gunshot alerts the rest of the team, who rush to find him. They arrive to see the dead bear lying on top of Glass. It takes all their strength to pull the bear's massive body off him. They're horrified by his condition. One of the men begins sewing up his wounds as best he can, while Glass writhes in agony. His throat is slashed, and his entire body is mutilated. Looking at his injuries, the men realize Glass won't survive for long. Maybe only a few more hours. Meanwhile, on the other side, the tribal chief finally trades the remaining hides he took from the American hunters to the French trappers. In exchange, he gets guns and horses. That means things are about to get much worse for Glass's group, because earlier, the tribes only used bows and arrows. Now they have firearms and horses, making them far more dangerous. Back with Glass's team, they build a makeshift wooden stretcher for him because he can no longer walk. They lift him onto it and start carrying him through the rough terrain, taking turns. They manage to carry him a long way, but then the path becomes steep. A tall mountain stands before them, and it's nearly impossible to climb even for a healthy man, let alone with someone as heavy and wounded as Glass. Still, they try. But no matter how hard they push, they can't haul him up. Their captain finally tells one of the men, "Put a cloth over his face." He's preparing to shoot Glass, believing it's a mercy killing. The captain thinks Glass is suffering terribly and won't survive anyway. Glass lies there, gasping, barely conscious. Just as the captain raises his gun, Glass's son steps in front of him and shouts, "Don't do it." The captain hesitates. He feels pity. After all, Glass had saved all their lives earlier. He lowers his gun. Then the captain turns to the group and says, "Whoever stays with Glass until he dies will be paid $100 each when we return to the fort." He adds, "Glass helped all of us. He deserves a natural death. When he dies, bury him properly and come back." Immediately, Glass's son says, "I'll stay." Another young man named Bridger, or sometimes pronounced Fraser in Hindi, also volunteers, saying, "I'll stay, even if I don't get paid." Since both are young, the captain insists one more experienced man must stay with them. Gerald steps forward and says, "I'll stay, but $100 is too little." The captain replies, "Fine, you'll get $300. Then Glass's son and Bridger say, "You can even take our share too." Gerald smirks and says, $300 is enough. I could buy myself a house with that. Anyway, Glass won't live more than 2 or 3 days. So Gerald, Glass's son Hawk, and Bridger stay behind, while the rest of the group moves on. Gerald sits beside the wounded Glass, waiting for him to die. But Glass refuses to die. The next day, Hawk and Bridger go out to hunt and fetch water. Meanwhile, Gerald starts digging a grave nearby. But why is he doing that? Is he planning to bury Glass alive? That's something we'll soon find out. Gerald keeps glancing at Glass, who's still breathing weakly. Finally, Gerald loses patience. He storms over to Glass and growls, "Why won't you just die? Because of you, all of us are going to get killed. Those tribal savages are still searching for us like madmen. If they find us here, we're finished. You could save your son and all of us by giving up your life." Then Gerald says coldly, "If you blink your eyes once, I'll take that as a sign that you're ready to die." Poor Glass struggles, trying desperately not to blink. He knows what Gerald means. But then Gerald taunts him again. "I guess you don't even want to save your own son." Hearing this, Glass blinks, one slow, heartbreaking blink, as if agreeing to sacrifice himself to save his son. Immediately, Gerald stuffs a cloth into Glass's mouth and starts suffocating him. Glass begins choking, struggling helplessly. That moment, Glass's son Hawk returns and sees what's happening. He screams, runs forward, and shoves Gerald away at gunpoint. Hawk points his rifle right at Gerald and yells for him to stop. Gerald tries to talk his way out, saying, "You don't understand, boy. I was only trying to end his pain." But Hawk refuses to listen. He's shouting in anger, until suddenly Gerald stabs Hawk in the stomach right in front of Glass. Glass can't even scream. His throat is slashed. He just lies there, watching helplessly as his son collapses, gasping for breath. Hawk dies right beside his father. Gerald drags Hawk's body away and hides it behind some bushes so that Bridger, the third boy, won't see it when he returns a while later. Bridger comes back and asks, "Where's Hawk?" Gerald lies. "He's around here somewhere. He'll be back soon." Meanwhile, Glass tries desperately to tell Bridger that Gerald killed his son, but his voice won't come out. He can only groan faintly, unable to form words. That night, Gerald and Bridger lie down to sleep. The next morning, Gerald wakes Bridger and says urgently, "I saw 20 tribal warriors heading this way. If we stay, they'll tear us to pieces." Bridger panics and says, "But what about Glass and Hawk?" Gerald replies coldly, "If Hawk's alive, he'll find us. As for Glass, he's as good as dead." Bridger protests, "Glass is still breathing, and we promised the captain we'd bury him properly after he dies." Gerald scowls and says, "You want to keep promises? Fine, I'll do it my way." He grabs Glass roughly by the legs and drags him toward the half-dug grave. Glass's body, covered in open wounds, scrapes against the ground as he groans in unbearable pain. Then Gerald throws him into the pit. Bridger shouts, "What are you doing?" Gerald says coldly, "He's going to die today or tomorrow anyway, and we're giving him a proper burial, just early." He starts covering Glass with dirt. Bridger, horrified, can't stop him. After covering Glass with a thin layer of soil, Gerald says, "Come on, let's go." Bridger hesitates, guilt written all over his face. He kneels beside the shallow grave and whispers, "I'm sorry, Mr. Glass. I have to go." He places a small water flask on a mound of dirt, then follows Gerald away into the forest. Glass's struggle for life now. Glass is alone. Half buried, half dead, he lies there for hours, barely conscious, suffocating beneath the dirt. Finally, he thinks, "If I'm going to die anyway, I might as well die try to live." With immense effort, he begins moving his fingers, then his arms, and slowly, painfully, he crawls out of the grave. Every movement tears at his wounds, but he doesn't stop till he drags himself across the ground toward the spot where his son's body lies. When he finally reaches Hawk's corpse, he breaks down completely, silent tears streaming from his swollen eyes. He rests his head on his son's chest, trembling with grief and fury. The fire of revenge starts burning inside him. Eventually, exhausted, he falls asleep beside his son's body. Meanwhile, Gerald and Bridger the next morning, Gerald wakes Bridger again and says, "Get up. We have to move. I saw 12 tribal warriors chasing us." Bridger frowns. "Yesterday you said 20. Now 12. He realizes Gerald is lying, that there are no warriors nearby. Gerald quickly points his gun and warns him, "You should be thanking me for saving your life. That half-dead man was a burden. If we'd stayed, we'd be dead by now. If you want to live, do exactly what I say. Otherwise, go back to Glass and die with him." Terrified and confused, Bridger reluctantly agrees and keeps walking with Gerald. Back to Glass meanwhile, Glass, still severely injured and starving, begins crawling again. He finds the skull of a dead animal, cracks one of its bones open, and eats the dried meat stuck to it. Then he drags himself to the edge of a slope and sees a river below. Thirsty and desperate, he crawls all the way down. He starts drinking, but the water pours right out through the wound in his neck. Even drinking hurts. Glass realizes he needs to treat his wounds, or he won't last long. That he gathers some gunpowder and dry grass, lights a small fire, and sprinkles powder into the gash on his throat. Then he takes a burning stick and presses it against the wound. The gunpowder ignites, cauterizing the cut with a spark and a flash. That he screams in silent agony, but the bleeding stops. The wound seals. Glass collapses unconscious from the pain. He remains by the river for several days, surviving by drinking water and eating bits of raw meat from dead animals he finds nearby. Days pass. The pain never stops, but Glass refuses to die. His body is broken, but his will is unshakable. One morning, he hears faint voices, men speaking French. He realizes a French fur trading camp is nearby. Terrified they might be enemies, he drags himself behind a rock and watches. He sees several French trappers laughing, eating, and holding a young native girl captive. She's tied to a pole, crying. These are the same French traders who traded with the tribal chief earlier, the ones who now have guns and horses. Glass wants to help the girl, but he's too weak. All he can do is wait. Later, when the men get drunk and fall asleep, the girl quietly unties herself and runs away. The next morning, the Frenchmen wake and realize she's gone. Furious, they start searching the forest, forcing Glass to crawl deeper into the woods to avoid being caught. After traveling for days, he grows weaker from hunger. His wounds fester. He tries to catch small fish with his bare hands, but fails. Then one day, he collapses near a dead buffalo carcass. Several wolves are already feeding on it. Glass knows if he tries to steal the meat, the wolves will kill him, but he's starving. So he waits, hiding behind a fallen log. Hours later, the wolves finish eating and leave. Glass crawls toward the carcass and starts eating the leftover raw meat, biting into it like a starving animal. Suddenly, he hears a sound, a horse's footsteps, that he freezes, thinking it might be an enemy. But when he looks up, he sees a tribal man, an old Pawnee warrior, standing over him. The man stares at Glass for a moment, then offers him a piece of roasted meat. Glass looks at him in disbelief. After everything, a stranger is helping him. The Pawnee man takes pity on Glass. He helps clean his wounds, applies herbs, and lets Glass ride his horse. They travel together silently through the forest for days. At night, the Pawnee tells Glass through gestures that his entire tribe was massacred by white men, his wife and son killed. He's now wandering alone, helping whoever crosses his path. Glass finally begins to heal. His wounds close, and he can walk again, limping but alive. They continue their journey until they find a small, abandoned village. There, the Pawnee ties a rope between two poles and hangs several small wooden prayer tokens. Glass watches quietly as the man whispers a chant for his lost family. The next morning, when Glass wakes up, the Pawnee man is gone. He left without saying goodbye. Glass feels both sorrow and gratitude. For the first time since the bear attack, he has strength again and a reason to keep going. The river escape. A few days later, Glass spots a group of French traders by the riverbank. Among them, the same men who had captured the tribal girl. He hides behind a rock and observes. He sees the tribal chief arrive with his warriors. They're demanding their daughter back. The French leader lies, saying she escaped into the forest. The chief doesn't believe him. His men attack. A bloody fight erupts, arrows and bullets flying everywhere. Glass uses the chaos to sneak away. He grabs a horse and rides as fast as he can into the mountains. That night, as he rests in the open plain, a blizzard sweeps in. The wind howls, freezing his face and hands. His horse panics, slips, and falls off a cliff, dying instantly. Now Glass is stranded again in the middle of the snowstorm. He knows he won't survive the cold unless he finds shelter. But there's nothing around, only snow and the dead horse. Desperate, he cuts open the horse's belly with his knife, pulls out its organs, and crawls inside the warm carcass. He lies there through the freezing night, wrapped in the horse's warmth. When morning comes, he crawls out, alive but covered in blood and frost. He begins walking again, following the river downstream. Finally, after weeks of agony, he spots a wooden fort in the distance, the same one his captain and team had promised to. Return to, Glass collapses at the gate. The soldiers on watch rush him inside, shocked to see him alive. The captain runs to him and says, "My God, we thought you were dead." Glass can barely whisper, "Where's Gerald? And where's Bridger?" The captain says, "Bridger is here. He came back days ago. But Gerald left. He said you died, and we buried you." Glass turns to Bridger, and the young man breaks down in tears. He confesses everything, how Gerald lied, how he buried Glass alive, and how he killed Hawk. The captain is furious. "That man will hang for this," he says, but Glass interrupts, whispering, No, he's mine. After recovering for a few days at the fort, Hugh Glass regains enough strength to move. His body is scarred, his throat half healed, but his determination burns brighter than ever. He tells the captain, "I don't want your soldiers. I'll find him myself." The captain warns him. Gerald knows the wild better than most. He'll be far ahead. Glass replies coldly, "He can't run from God." With a rifle, a knife, and a few supplies, Glass leaves the fort, limping, silent, and haunted. Gerald on the run meanwhile. Gerald is miles away, hiding in a small wooden outpost by the mountains. He's uneasy, plagued by guilt and fear. He tries to convince himself that what he did was necessary, that he mutters to himself, "The man was half dead. I gave him mercy." But deep down, he knows the truth. He killed an innocent boy and buried his father alive. Every night, he dreams of Glass crawling out of the grave. One morning, Gerald goes outside to fetch water and finds tracks in the snow. Footprints. A man's footprints. His eyes widen. He knows instantly who it is. "Impossible," he whispers. The pursuit. Glass follows the trail relentlessly, through snow, over cliffs, across frozen rivers. He moves like a ghost, unseen, unstoppable. He finally reaches the French camp and demands information. "Where's the man who killed my son?" One of the traders, trembling, points toward the mountains. Glass mounts a horse and rides through a violent snowstorm. Hours later, he spots Gerald on the horizon, trying to flee on horseback. Glass loads his rifle and fires. The bullet strikes Gerald's horse, which collapses, throwing him off. Gerald scrambles to his feet, wounded but alive. He grabs his musket and hides behind a rock, waiting. Silence fills the frozen air, only the sound of wind and creaking ice. Then Glass appears, walking slowly toward him. Rifle aimed, Gerald shouts, "You're a ghost. You should have died. What are you?" Glass doesn't answer. His eyes are hollow, full of grief. The final fight. Gerald fires first. The shot grazes Glass's shoulder. Glass fires back, hitting Gerald in the arm. They charge at each other. Both guns empty. They draw knives. They wrestle in the snow. Each strike brutal, desperate. Gerald slashes Glass's side. Glass stabs him in the leg. Blood stains the white snow. At last, Glass overpowers Gerald, pinning him down near the riverbank. He raises his knife, ready to strike. Gerald gasps, "You kill me, and you'll still be dead inside. You want revenge? Do it. You'll never see peace again." Glass's hand trembles. Then, through the howling wind, Glass remembers something. The Pawnee man's words. "Revenge is in God's hands, not ours." Glass looks at Gerald, his face twisted with hatred, then slowly lowers the knife. He grabs Gerald by the collar, drags him toward the river, and shoves him into the freezing water. Gerald floats downstream, weak, bleeding, carried by the current. In the distance, a group of native warriors appear on the opposite bank. They see the dying Gerald drifting toward them. Glass watches silently as the current delivers Gerald to his fate. One of the warriors raises his spear. Glass turns away. The sound of a scream echoes faintly behind him. Then silence. The end. Glass collapses in the snow, staring at the sky. His breath forms clouds in the cold air. He sees visions. His wife standing by the river, smiling softly, and his son calling out to him. He whispers, "I'll see you soon." Then he closes his eyes. The wind blows over his still body as the river flows endlessly beside him, carrying away the blood, the pain, and the story of Hugh Glass, the man who crawled out of his own grave to seek justice.